Welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb, joined as always by Alan, and it is Oklahoma game week. Finally, the end of this rough October stretch, and maybe a little easier or softer landing if we're going to use our I don't know. I feel like I've been hearing that term a lot lately. Anyway, softer landing than we were expecting in the preseason because Oklahoma is a flawed team. We'll start there, I guess. A flawed team, but still a pretty good team. And I think South Carolina is a flawed team, but still a pretty good team. So it should be a fun week of football. Before we get fully into South Carolina, Oklahoma preview stuff, which will be the majority of the show, I did want to talk about a quick note that happened to South Carolina earlier this afternoon. 2026 DB Jazavian Currents committed this afternoon. It's another 4-star, another in-state guy. And you're really starting to see South Carolina kind of hone in and shut down the state in a way that they haven't done in quite some time. Or I wouldn't say haven't done in quite some time. They've actually been pretty successful in state. But it's the mixture of in-state talent and their ability to kind of convince that talent to stay home that has been really, really key in the last few commitments. I mean, we've talked about Jordan Gidron. We've talked about Malik Clark, both of those 4-star 2025 wide receivers from in the state. And now you add Currents. And that actually puts South Carolina's 2026 class. Now, granted, that is 14 months from now, as Alan said on Twitter. But that puts them at number 7 in the country right now, pretty early on in that class. And you brought up a good point that the 2024 class kind of started high as well, pretty early on. There's some questions on whether or not you're going to hold on to those guys. And then you ultimately did get that across the finish line. And, it was Shane Beamer's best class. And we're already seeing that class in particular pay some dividends here. But something to keep an eye on. You'd rather be 7th in the country at this time than not. So a good start to that class.
Another 26 note too. Georgia committed quarterback 5-star. Jared Curtis decommitted literally an hour ago before we get on this podcast. He has South Carolina in the top, 5 or 6 or whatever. He was at the LSU game. He's supposed to be coming back next month. Obviously you have sellers in the program now. You have Dante Reno in this last class, Cutter Woods in the 25 class, but you don't have a quarterback in the 26 class right now after Len Duckworth committed.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something to keep an eye on as well. And, good players tend to want to play together. And if it seems like there's a little bit of a narrative happening there. We also mentioned the addition of Darren Usher this offseason as the director of player personnel, or whatever his new title is. That's what the old title was. And, maybe that's starting to pay some dividends. I think you also have seen like a Mike Furry and some of the staff additions really ramping up. And then that in addition to like Torian Gray, who's been killing it since he got here, Sterling Lucas, who's been killing it since he got here. So, it seems like at least from a recruiting standpoint, the staff's in a really good spot. And we'll talk more about this in the bye week, but I think really the on the field product has been pretty good too. But the way that this week goes, I think is the way that the rest of the season goes to some degree. Not to, put the stakes so high that you can't bounce back.
No, I think you're right.
If you pick up a 4th loss, but this feels like a winnable game on the road in Norman. And the way that you were talking about it before we got started was you kind of view them as mirror images of each other to some degree. I think that's somewhat true, but tell me what you mean by that.
Yeah, so I guess first of all, I want to start this off by just reading a few numbers about the Oklahoma offense. I think anybody who's really looking at college football this year knows that this is almost an unimaginably bad offense for what we're used to seeing out of, Oklahoma University, the University of Oklahoma. But Right now in the country, out of 134 FBS teams, Oklahoma is 101st in rushing offense, 123rd in passing offense, 125th in total offense, 96th in scoring offense, and all four of those numbers are dead last in the SEC. This is not just like a bad offense. This is unbelievably going to Oklahoma. This might be the worst offense South Carolina sees all year, outside of like Akron. Um, you look at that and you ask yourself, okay, how is Oklahoma 4-2? How have they done this? Their defense is really good, and specifically, they force a lot of turnovers. And I think you kind of look at South Carolina. Now, South Carolina's offense is not quite that bad, but South Carolina's offense has had its struggles. They've struggled turning the ball over. They struggled moving the ball, but their defense has kind of kept them in every game except Ole Miss. That's kind of what I mean. Like, I don't see any way around it. This just looks like a rock fight. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, to me, I would say South Carolina's offense has more upside than
Yeah.
Oklahoma's, but it's been very inconsistent. Whereas Oklahoma's hasn't shown much upside at all yet this year. But I agree that obviously the strength of both teams is their defense. The way that both teams have won some games or been in some games in South Carolina's case that they maybe wouldn't have otherwise is the defense creating turnovers, showing up in opportunistic moments. And then, yeah, South Carolina's had a little bit more ability to hit a big play, which Oklahoma has struggled quite a bit with. So,
That's yeah, that's another stat I wanted to bring up. This is from Max Olson at ESPN. Oklahoma has gained 20 plus yards on 3.4% of its plays this season. That is 3.4% of snaps. Third worst among all Power Four offenses in the last decade, not just this season.
yeah. But all of that to not undersell just how good this defense is. I
Yeah.
mean, South Carolina fans are very familiar with the name Brent Venables. And this defense is every bit as good as a lot of those Clemson defenses that wrecked South Carolina's day for a decade. Um, the only difference is obviously they have not had any complimentary football on the other side, really. And with the way the South Carolina's defense has been playing, I don't think that we would expect them to suddenly have their best offensive day against South Carolina or anything either. So I really do think we have to start with ball security, shooting yourself in the foot with penalties, all those sorts of things. Like, can South Carolina play a clean football game? And that kind of is the number one key to this one. And I know that that's like a cliche that everyone says about every game, like, who'll turn the ball over? But especially with the way that this one matches up, I think that that's just where you got to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe you disagree with this, but just point blank, without saying any other stats or numbers or whatever from the game, whoever wins the turnover battle wins this game. I kind of think it almost boils right down to that.
Yeah, I mean, it depends, right? Like if it's like plus one, I don't think it. I think
Yeah.
that it
Okay.
doesn't matter that much. But if it's a big difference, if it's clear that one team made more mistakes than the other, then yeah, I think that it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's the way it goes. And who can take advantage of those mistakes too, right? Who's scoring points off of those turnovers? Because we've seen South Carolina put themselves in pretty good position at times and then not land the plane, so to speak. We saw that 3 or 4
Yeah.
times last week against Alabama. So
Yeah, I think maybe more what I mean just with that, and I get everything you're saying is I just think both these offenses, but especially the Oklahoma offense with some of the struggles they've had, really up front too at the offensive line, going to have a really hard time starting 1st and 10 at their own 25 and putting a 75-yard drive together. It might happen. I don't want, that's going to get clipped when someone, scores in the first drive on the script, but it's going to be a hard time for both these offenses putting a 10-play touchdown drive together. I think you're going to have to hit some explosives. And to be honest with you, I think if either offense gets a short field and can score a touchdown, 30-yard, 40-yard field, the kind of thing that kind of cost them the game Saturday, right? Is the fumble up 19-14 and Jalen Miller will get the 30-yard field and scores. I think Oklahoma can do that to you. I think there's still enough on this offense. We can talk about their quarterback situation in a second, but there's still enough there to beat you at the short field. I think you feel really good about your chances if Oklahoma has to go 70, 80 yards on you consistently.
yeah, I mean, I think you pointed this out earlier. The big question is the turnovers, but also something that South Carolina has struggled with that Oklahoma has excelled at is sacks,
Yeah.
which obviously one can kind of lead to another or whatever. OU is currently tied for 10th in sacks per game at 3.17. And honestly, if South Carolina held them to 3 sacks in the game, I think you would feel like that's a win based on how they've played against lesser defenses than what they're going to see on Saturday. That's not to like it's a weird game to talk about, right? Because I think we can a little bit doom and gloom about the offense based on what we've seen so far, based on the offensive line struggles. And at the same time, I think you have a huge advantage on your defense because they have had the same struggles, and back to the mirror image thing, I guess that makes a lot of sense. So, who can protect the ball better? Who can hit a couple explosive plays, and who can take advantage of short fields when they get them against these two strong defenses? I think is a big key for sure.
Yeah, and not only that, I think this Oklahoma offense has struggled so much with explosives. I just gave you the stat. They're down 4 of their top 5 receivers already out on the availability report, and the 5th one's questionable. To give you an idea of what they're dealing with there, but quarterback Michael Hawkins Jr. He's a true freshman. That's another one where we've said all year South Carolina has a redshirt freshman at quarterback that could be a disadvantage. Well, Oklahoma's starting a true freshman right now, so you're not even this might be the only game all year we talk about that. But he's mobile. He can use his legs. He's gotten outside the pocket a little bit for Oklahoma, the little bit I've watched. You're going to have to play defense kind of the way you did last week, honestly, on Jalen Milroe. You're going to have to be, I don't know. I think Shane Beamer used the word like sticky in coverage last week, talking about kind of what they did to Alabama's wide receivers. And I think you might have to spy Michael Hawkins. I think that's one thing I noticed watching Red River last week is Texas was spying on pretty much every single play on Michael Hawkins Jr. And I think you're going to have to do that again here because that is one of the few ways I think Oklahoma's offense can get you is with the quarterback running game.
Which, yeah, you did handle Milroe better than most teams last week. So, if that is the same game plan, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Interesting thing from a motivation standpoint or mindset standpoint to me, I feel like both teams feel like this is a game that they should win in some ways. We talked a little bit with OU insiders. I always get the name Jesse Crittenden. Who we have an article on GamecockScoop.com on that. And he basically said that this is a pivotal game for OU, and if they don't win this game, that he has a hard time seeing too many other SEC wins on the schedule, which I would agree with. And then on the South Carolina side, we all put in our staff picks, which we'll get into a little bit later, and all of us picked South Carolina to win this one. Maybe a little warily, but we all did. What are you hearing, I guess, from the staff and stuff is about their mindset as they're coming off another game that they feel like they should have won, and now have this opportunity on the road in a game that, could go either way. Road in the SEC is always difficult, but feels like a kind of a must-win spot.
I think I want to be careful how I word this because I don't mean it in a way that like people are going to start making rash changes or do anything, but I think there's frustration setting in just in how close it's been. You feel like you had the LSU game won. You feel like you had a really good chance at Alabama last Saturday in the fourth quarter. And there's just kind of this looking around like, man, I think Shane had the quote that, none of our guys are into moral victories. And I would believe that from him. You're 3-3 right now. That's kind of the reality of the situation. I think we all would agree. I think we talked about this in the Sunday show. We kind of reset the season at the halfway point. You can't miss a bowl game this year with this defense. That'd just be no way around it, a waste. You need those bowl practices, the extra 15 you get that you didn't have last year. I don't want to like limit the expectations to, win 6 games, make a bowl game, but I think that's definitely a minimum. And you lose this game Saturday. Think about the conversation we're having, right? That's a winless October for the second year in a row. That's 4 losses out of 5 in SEC play. That's 1 win since the Kentucky game. It would have been against Akron. And we're looking at a 2 weeks going into a bye week where you're going to be 3-4 heading to November. And assuming you beat Wofford, you're going to have to split 4 games against A&M, Vandy, Missouri, and Clemson just to get to a bowl game and get to that minimum expectation. So, yeah, I think this is definitely the biggest game of the year for South Carolina so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough to say because I do think that the team has played pretty well up to this point. But in some ways, if you lose this one, all of that's kind of squandered because then you're
Yeah, I'm
back
with you.
to um, just hoping and praying and battling for 6-6. Um, and it becomes a little bit of a, I mean, you make a bowl, maybe that wouldn't be a lost season, but compared to what the upside of it was, compared to the way that you started the season and some of these games that you were in, it'd be hard for that not to feel like a disappointment. Um, Especially, I mean, we've talked about it before, but just like how many veterans you have on that defense,
Yep.
uh, how great that defense has played. And I think if you ended up with a 6-6 season with that level of defense, you would feel underwhelmed. So if you're going to exceed that, you have to win this week.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. I have a really tough time kind of imagining a path to 7 wins if you don't win Saturday. And but the flip side of that though is if you do win Saturday, Shane used the quote Sunday that they're just, and I'm going to use it tomorrow with my final preview, that they've just been banging on the door and they know it's going to fly open. If you do win Saturday, I know this is not a vintage Oklahoma team. This is not Barry Switzer's Oklahoma taking the field Saturday, but that's still a brand name. That's still a tough place to play. I think I saw the number this week that Oklahoma hasn't lost 2 straight home games since, or only once since the '90s. Like, it would be big, I think, for Shane himself, going back there, and also for this program to win. And then you're 4-3. You've got 2 weeks off, not off, but 2 weeks, a bye week to get healthy, to kind of feel good about this thing. You're going into November where Shane Beaver teams have gotten better. I just think the difference. It sounds dumb. It's one game, but I just think the difference between 3-4 and 4-3 is a lot bigger than maybe it would be in a normal season. Both just with what this matchup is, the timing of the bye week after it, and what you have on the board for November.
Well, and one more narrative thing: if you win this game, pretty much no matter how you win it, I think even if it is ugly, because I think we expect it to get ugly at times with just how good Oklahoma's defense is. It looks like you played what, four, math: Kentucky, Ole Miss, Alabama, LSU. Yeah, 4 out of 5 SEC games well, and then Ole
Yeah,
Miss looks like the outlier. If you come out and lay an egg, then it looks like you're just an inconsistent team. It's okay
yeah.
to have the one down game or whatever, but if it's up and down every single week, then it's like, who is this team and what can we expect from them?
Where I guess you mentioned the ugly point there, and I don't think there's any way around it. Like, I think if you're going to win this game, it's going to have to be ugly. I just don't think you're good enough on offense, and Oklahoma's defense is going to break enough that you win this game the way you say won at Kentucky. I just don't see that happening. But I also think there's a good side of winning ugly, right? Like, you went on the road in a tough spot in a game where things went against you. You found a way to get it done, and what that can do for you. And I also, this is another point. I was on a radio in Oklahoma City earlier today, and they asked me kind of what the worst case scenario for South Carolina is here. And I said another slow start, right? Like, you've been down 14-0 the last 2 weeks, and I don't think I don't think Oklahoma's offense should be able to jump out on you 14-0 like that. But I don't think you're equipped to come back on this defense that can pin its ears back and protect a lead, which is not something Oklahoma's been able to do pretty much all year.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Health wise, what are we hearing? I know that right before this, Beamer was on Carolina calls.
Yep.
Who do we expect to be in and out this week?
Yep. So everybody who was out last week is out again. That would be Jared Brown, DeAndre Jules, Kelvin Hunter, Jalewis Sullivan, Ja'Kai Moore, who sounds like he's going to be out for the season. Beamer did say that Brown and Jules, who are probably the two biggest names in that list, should both be back for the A&M game after the bye week, but you are going to have to be without them again this week. And then Cason Henry is probable. Beamer said he's going to be good. Probable listed on the availability report, but Beamer just said that he's going to be good to go. And that brings me to a question. We talked about it a little bit on the Sunday show. I asked Shane about it Sunday night. He said, Jatavius, it is Shivers, by the way. I got clarification. But Jatavius Shivers has played well. I kind of get the sense that they're going to go back to Cason Henry at right tackle. They don't maybe want to bench him for an injury, but I'm also not sure if that's the right answer here. Do you have a right tackle thought now that it sounds like both guys are healthy and you're going to have an actual decision to make?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing reading between the lines a little bit, I guess, when you look at Dowell Loggins' comments on Shivers this week, and correct me if I'm reading it wrong because I just read the transcript and didn't hear it out loud, but he said he came in and played well. he's learning to be a really good practice player. And to me,
Yep.
the way I read that at least was, maybe, I mean, he's a freshman, right? But how consistent has he been at practice on a week to week basis compared to the consistency of Henry? And maybe that's why you give him the nod. Maybe you are still, even if he's the better athlete or whatever, you're still trying to teach him that discipline lesson or whatever, which I think makes a lot of sense. But pure upside, based on what I've seen out of the two of them, I do think Shivers is probably more athletic, just simple as it is. Now, that isn't everything when it comes to playing offensive line, but it's not nothing either, especially when you're playing some elite defensive ends like we're going to see this week, and you need that quicker first step and all those sorts of things. So I like to think you give Henry the start because, like you said, you don't take it away from him because of an injury. But if he struggles a little bit earlier, it wouldn't surprise me if we see Shivers step in quicker than maybe he would have 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, that's going to be I'm going to be curious about the kind of drive 1 to drive 2 to drive 3 and so on with that. I do think it is, I don't want to say drive by drive, but I do think there is the reality of this game where if you get beat off the edge one time, that can be the difference in the game. I know that sounds ridiculous to say, but everything we've already talked about with the turnovers and how good Oklahoma's defensive ends are, yeah, one strip sack can be the difference in this game, especially if it's in your own territory, it's a short field kind of situation. So I think I'm with you that Henry starts. I don't know I don't think you should be reluctant to make a change there because you did it mid game last weekend. I wrote a story on Gamecock Scoop Monday if you're subscribed. I basically just broke down Shivers versus Henry and the numbers with two of them in the game, and they were all better with Shivers out there. I don't know if that's circumstantial, correlation, causation thing, but I thought it was interesting nonetheless.
Defensively, I feel like you feel pretty good about your core group. Um, Quick note there: Kyle Kennard got added to like the Blintikov list and all of that this week, which
incredible.
Makes sense because he's been one of the most dominant.
He's leading the SEC in sacks right now.
I believe it. Yeah, I mean he was leading the country for most of the season. He's probably still pretty close up there. Yep. Yeah, I mean he's playing himself into maybe a first round pick. I mean, if he can keep this up. But anyway, I think you feel good about your starting group. I think you asked, or not you asked, but someone asked about the corner depth. And that's something that we've talked a little bit about on the podcast throughout the season. Again, you feel great with O'Donnell Fortune. I think you feel really good about the way that Judge Collier's played. I think you still feel good about Vakari Swain's upside. But that's still probably one of your thinnest positions right now, and your youngest positions. Collier's is he a redshirt freshman, sophomore?
Sophomore,
and
yeah.
Vakari Swain's a redshirt freshman, so they're the same age. What are your concerns, I guess, defensively headed into this one? We kind of seem like we're talking like South Carolina's defense is going to show up and take care of business against an inferior offense, but do you have any like fears or players on Oklahoma side that are maybe concerning that we haven't talked about?
I mean, there is what I talked about earlier that I do still think there's a lot of weight with, just in terms of the ability for Michael Hawkins Jr. to get outside the pocket. There is always the Jackson Arnold possibility too. We haven't talked about that yet, but Michael Hawkins Jr. They scored 3 points last week. I know Brent Venables was asked in his press conference if they've if they considered a quarterback change last week, and he said no. But again, you kind of read between the lines there. It was I don't think he ruled it out, to put it that way. Just talking to some Oklahoma people this week, I wouldn't be shocked if Jackson Arnold got back in this game. So there's always that threat too. Someone was a little bit better at pushing the ball down the field. I know Arnold got benched because of a turnover problem he had, but maybe that's where the worry comes in. It's just if there is a quarterback change, or if Oklahoma can get something going off the bench. But yeah, honestly, like, I know it sounds bad, but like, they scored 3 points last week. Their offense only scored 20 at Auburn. They scored on offense. They scored, I think, 15 against Tennessee. Like, Oklahoma's, 16 against Houston too, and Houston's not even good. I sound blunt, and I have a really hard time even picturing how Oklahoma scores like 30 in this game. Maybe the 20s if things break right, they get a couple turnovers, but I think it's a mismatch, to be honest with you. And you could say the same the other way, like Oklahoma's defense against South Carolina's offense, but I think this is a mismatch.
Yeah. One other interesting thing from a just like mindset standpoint is how South Carolina attacks this defense, because we saw last week Oklahoma's defense held up pretty good against Texas in the first quarter. They were actually leading 3-0 at the end of the first quarter,
Yep.
right? Um, and then eventually, it's Steve Sarkisian, and Texas was able to make adjustments and overwhelm to the point of a blowout. I like Dowell Loggins. I think he's done a pretty good job with opening scripts, post halftime scripts, in-game adjustments on the sideline. Maybe not the strongest of his strong suits. So I don't know. How do you think that they do script it? Do they script it aggressive, or knowing that you have a really good defense? Do you play it a little bit more conservative, try not to make mistakes, um, and just try to win an ugly ball game? Because it's hard to think that you're gonna eventually wear them out and score 20 points or whatever. But maybe that is the idea, right? Like, just keep coming at them, even if it doesn't work at first. Trust your defense to hold up, even if you put them in a couple of bad situations, um, and trust that eventually Oklahoma's defense is just going to run out of gas. But is your defense going to run out of gas? Like, you have to do enough on
Sure.
offense too.
Yeah, I don't. I think about, you mentioned post halftime scripts, that first drive of the second half last week. I don't think you're going to be able to kind of just sit there and run the ball on this defense. I mean, I think the best of Oklahoma's defense is kind of that interior, that D line. Danny Stutzman's going to be an NFL linebacker next year. So I think you're going to have to open it up a little bit. If there is a weakness in this OU defense, and it's not much, but it's the cornerbacks. Texas hit a couple deep balls last week. Auburn, I think, hit 2 plays over 50 yards in that game that Oklahoma ended up winning. So they've been a little bit, and I say a little bit because it's still a really good defense, but a little bit susceptible to explosive plays. So I think you do kind of trust LaNorris Sellers a little bit to air it out. I think this might be a spot where Mazeo Bennett can get a hold of a deep ball in a game. But I think you're going to have to be aggressive to hit some explosives because, like I said it about Oklahoma, and I think it's the same for South Carolina. I have a hard time seeing the 10-play, 75-yard, 6-minute drive happening in this game regularly. Maybe catch one, but I just don't think that's a reliable way to live in this game.
Yeah, well, you even think about the way the Venables defenses run. They're aggressive. They blitz.
Yep, for sure.
Um, so
Corners on islands, they're going to man you up big time on the outside.
Exactly, and I think you're going to have to take some shots. You're going to have to trust that if you throw some up, Nicholas Harbor is going to make catches like he did last week. Michael Smith can be a matchup problem. Josh Simon, who really didn't make too much of an impact last week, but we saw they tried to force it to him a little bit early in the Ole Miss game before that one fully went off the rails. So, yeah, that'll be really interesting in how they approach it. I'd also like to see maybe you're not trying to run right into the teeth of the defense, but some draws, some screens, shovel. That we saw that shovel pass last week.
Yeah,
just
good point.
a couple of moments of misdirection where you're using Oklahoma's aggressiveness on defense against them a little bit.
How much Robbie Ashford do you think we see? Because I kind of think this matchup is not suited for him, just with how well Oklahoma plays the run. And obviously, we talked about it before. If he's in the game, a defense is usually looking for a run. I feel like this probably isn't a good matchup for him.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as long as LaNorris Sellers is healthy, you trust his arm a little bit more and his accuracy a little bit more. So, if this is gonna be a game where you try to take your shots in one-on-ones, you want the guy that's got the bigger arm in there more often than not. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think that he still plays a role later in the season when you feel like you do have some opportunities to run that zone read, because I do still think he's slightly ahead of Sellers from that standpoint. But yeah, I mean, we could be wrong. Maybe there's something tricky up their sleeve or something. If they do have a few series in a row where they feel like they can't get much going, maybe, I don't know, you pull out a double pass or something like that.
I think this is not the week to do that, to be taking
Yeah.
chances, to be doing anything that could turn the ball over against this team.
Right.
But I get what you're saying, and I do think you need to try to push the envelope a little bit down the field, just because that's, again, I think you have to hit some explosives in this game.
Right.
Nick Harbor, kind of speaking of that, first kind of action we've seen, not first action, but the biggest action we've seen from him so far this year, last week in the game tying touchdown. Shane Beamer's been very methodical in talking about him, just kind of, he's getting better every week. He's practicing better every week. He doesn't want to put any expectations there. Do you think, you mentioned the confidence that catch would give him on the Sunday show, and I think you're completely right. Does Nick Harbor start to get it moving a little bit? I don't want to be the guy who calls in a Beamer's radio show and says throw a go route to the fast guy. That's not what I'm trying to do here. But do you think Nick Harbor starts to get it moving a little bit more after last week?
I think they should trust him a little bit more. See if that confidence is something that you can build on. That was a pretty elite catch. And like I said, if you're gonna have some one-on-one scenarios this week, like put the fast tall guy in, and let him go for it. So I hope so. I still think he has some limitations in his route tree. He's still learning the position, all those sorts of things. But when he takes a step forward, reward him for that step forward and see what happens. Because I do think he's an elite athlete, and sometimes elite athletes just do athlete things, which is what I think he did last week. So
yeah, it's a good. That's probably a good way to put it. Trying to think if there's anything else on this game. We talked about the kicking situation Sunday. It sounds like it's still going to be Alex Herrera. I don't have anything to add to that. I just think it's worth noting. Oklahoma's had its fair share of kicking struggles too. I know they've missed an extra point against Tennessee in that game. They've missed a couple They missed 2 field goals, I think, last week against Texas. I don't know. Do you see an edge either way on special? Great punter battle this week. 2 of the best in the country with Luke Elzinga at Oklahoma and obviously Kai Kroger.
I mean, I think in a game that's going to be this tight and it's going to be defensive dominated. Yeah, I think you need to take your opportunities to flip the field when you can. I think that's something that you're going to have to consider. I know Shane likes to be aggressive on 4th and short. Maybe there's some times for that this week, but there's also some times that if you have an opportunity to pin them deep, that might be your best move because you know that your defense has an advantage too. So it'll be an interesting chess match, how they try to play field position and stuff this week for sure. As far as the kicking goes, I mean, we talked about it on Sunday. You would prefer to take your field goals from inside 45. And if you get forced into a situation worse than that, it'll be interesting to see if they try anything different or maybe lean on going for it a little bit more often or whatever. But I mean, I think it's definitely going to make an impact. It goes back to the complementary football part. I view them as kind of similar to those Oklahoma special teams and South Carolina special teams. So the real advantage when I look at it on paper is I think South Carolina is a little bit more explosive on offense, but everything else seems kind of equal to maybe like Oklahoma slightly better on defense. Slightly.
Dare I ask for a score prediction? I mean, what do you kind of think? The over-under right now is at 41.5 to give you an idea of what Vegas is thinking on a total.
I would be tempted to take the under.
I think I'm going to. Not at an actual bet, but like just in a score prediction tomorrow.
Yeah. I feel like I lean like 20-10 South Carolina.
Okay. Double-digit win. You pick it South Carolina, I'm assuming there.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I know that the spread's only, it has moved in South Carolina.
1.5 now, the number I saw today.
Yeah, so that moved towards South Carolina. If you were paying attention, it opened at 3.5 to Oklahoma. But I do think that South Carolina is the better team. I do think that South Carolina's defense is going to play lights out. And I just don't know how Oklahoma moves the ball against them. Now, granted, if South Carolina turns it over like 3 times in their own territory or something, then it could be a very different script. But, I'm going to assume that they're going to show up. So 20-10. What about you?
I'm taking a 1-point win kind of in the model of the 2022 Clemson game. I'm going to say 17-16 South Carolina. I know that sounds gross. You're probably cringing. 17-16 is not a super appetizing football score, but I just have such a hard time with either of these offenses getting to 20 even without some help. But I think everything you just said is right. South Carolina is a little bit better, could hit a couple more explosives. I think they can put 2 touchdown drives together in this game. That's 14. And then you find a field goal somewhere, win it 17-16, you get out of there with a 1-point win.
You got a safety in there?
I thought about doing like a 19-17 or like a safety or something, but honestly, would you be that surprised if between these 2 defenses there was a safety this week? Either way.
No, not at all. You want to look around the country a little bit? This is actually a really exciting week 8 of college football season. So we'll have our full staff picks out on GamecockScoop.com tomorrow. You have caught me on the straight picks. So both of us are leading the pack at 48 and 27 on straight picks. And then I am 42, 31, and 2 against the spread. And I'm the only one that has a winning record against the spread right now. So, but we should note that I started super strong. I had like a 20 game lead, and I've like probably lost like 9 out of 10 the last 2 weeks or
Thought you had
something.
the scripts there for a while.
Yeah, apparently it was pretty crazy. Anyway, you got Miami, 4-point favorite at Louisville. I think Louisville's looked pretty good, but Miami's looked a lot better to me. Obviously, it's a home game, but I just picked Miami to win and cover. Although it wouldn't surprise me if it's a 3-point game instead or whatever.
Yeah, I had the 3 there the same. I think Miami wins by a field goal, kind of what they did at Cal late. I think Miami's about the same as last year, but with a much, much better, like maybe Heisman finalist quarterback in Cam Ward. I think that's covering up a lot of problems. I don't think this Miami team's amazing. I think Louisville's pretty tough at home, and they'll keep it within a field goal.
Yeah, I mean, the only time we've seen Miami really, really struggle was when they went across the country. So this is a little bit lower or less of a road trip. Clemson is minus 21.5 at home against Virginia. And I put Clemson to win, but not cover. But now I'm kind of regretting that because didn't Virginia like fire their offensive coordinator or something today?
Yeah. I know Virginia lost last week. They have a pretty good record still at 4-2, but I mean, South Carolina fans won't want to hear it. Clemson's beaten the heck out of everybody they've played, not named Georgia. I don't think Clemson's like national title good, but I think they're better than Miami, to be honest with you. I think they're probably the best team in the ACC. I think they win and cover at home pretty comfortably.
The Pitt disrespect. I hear you.
Oh, I did forget. They are going to Pitt in November. I saw that on the schedule. So it's a good point.
Pretty much the only real test left before South Carolina.
Yeah, because they don't play Miami in the regular season.
Yep. You got Nebraska, who is a 7-point underdog at Indiana. Obviously, Indiana is the lone unbeaten in the Big Ten. No, sorry, there too. But Nebraska has been playing pretty well. I don't think Indiana has had to prove it yet. I will pick Indiana to win since it's at home, and I do think they're legitimately pretty good. But I think Nebraska covers that 7 points.
With you in all regards there. I think high-scoring game, 2 good offenses, 2 good quarterbacks in this game. 7's a full touchdown. Maybe it's 6.5 or 6. I might take Indiana to cover, but give me a full touchdown with Dylan Raiola. I'll take the Huskers to cover, but Indiana to improve to 7-0.
Yeah. As I said earlier, we all picked South Carolina, which feels scary, but
ominous. Yeah.
By the way, our guest picker this week is Andy Boyd, who is a fan favorite from the Holtz and Spurrier years. Played quite a bit on and off, and he picked South Carolina to win. Usually, the guest picker picks South Carolina to win, though. So we'll kind of see. Although the guest pickers aren't doing bad; they're holding their own, 43 and 22 on the season. All right, this one's going to be really fun. Bama is a 2.5-point favorite at Tennessee, which is crazy to me. That sounds like a sucker's bet, which is why I'm probably a sucker here, but I picked Tennessee to obviously cover and win.
Yeah, I'll walk into that trap with you. In Neyland, Tennessee getting 2.5 points. I just think Alabama's struggled so much with explosives to handle those. And that's kind of what Tennessee does at Heupel offense. Nico, I know Tennessee came out flat last week and lost, or they beat Florida, but it felt like a loss. They needed overtime to beat Florida. I have no idea, though. I think this might be the toughest game on the sheet to call. I had a tougher time calling this than even like Texas, Georgia. But I did pick Tennessee at home to hand Alabama a second loss of the month.
It feels to me like both defenses are behind the offenses, and it could just be like who scores last sort of thing, for sure.
That's what it was 2 years ago when Tennessee beat them there.
Right. Notre Dame is a 10.5-point favorite at Georgia Tech. I have a soft spot in my heart for Georgia Tech for some reason. So I have them to cover, but Notre Dame's probably going to win that one.
I picked Tech to cover, but I'm feeling shaky. I don't know if you saw this morning. Brent Key said that Haynes King's a game-time decision. He got banged up last week for Tech at North Carolina. If Haynes King's not playing, I think Notre Dame covers 10.5 against a backup quarterback. But if he is, I'm going to say Tech covers, but that pick might be blown up before the game starts.
Yeah, I agree with you and your reasoning there. And he's the main reason that they have gone from below average to average this year. So
Yep.
you got Michigan -1 at
Ranked
Illinois.
matchup between Michigan and Illinois.
Yeah, that one was kind of interesting to me. Across the board, we kind of went back and forth. You picked Michigan, I picked Illinois. Two other people picked Michigan, another Illinois. So I think I just like the way that Bielema runs the program and all, and I kind of want them to be elevated into that next year, Big Ten, as Michigan sort of shrinks. But I could be a little ahead of myself here, and Michigan could still just be better.
Yeah, I'm taking the talent for Michigan. I don't feel confident about it at all, especially on the road. I'll take the little bit more talented team. Also, speaking of games I'm not confident in, this next one, geez.
Yeah, I have no idea what to make of this one. So LSU is a 3-point favorite at Arkansas. Arkansas has honestly had a similar season to South Carolina at this point, where they've been in pretty much every game, but lost some close disappointments. LSU hasn't looked particularly dominant through most of the season, but won their fair share of close games. Feels like it's going to be a close game for both. It always is, really, between these two teams. It's at Arkansas too, so the added thing there. But I did pick LSU to win and cover. But yeah, like you said, don't feel super confident about that.
Would anybody be surprised if LSU followed up a big emotional win with a letdown on the road against a really physical Arkansas team? I don't like. It just feels like exactly the kind of game Arkansas would win. But I also walked into the trap and picked LSU.
Yeah, that's it. And then the game of the day is Georgia plus 3.5 at Texas. That seems like a lot of points to me. Seems like a lot of points to you.
Actually up to 5 now. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, that's wild. I picked Georgia to win because, to me, at this point, you still gotta beat them before you. I'm going to put you in that tier. I feel like Texas has been very good, but they haven't played a team to that caliber yet. It'll be a statement if they end up pulling it off, but I'm going to pick Georgia for now.
Texas by a field goal. I think Georgia covers. I think that's too many points. But I have altered my thought that Ohio State was the best team in the country, and maybe they still are. I don't know. I thought I had Ohio. I think you can go back to our staff picks before the season started. I had Ohio State and Texas playing the national title game. I still think Texas is 1 or 1A in the country, and I'll take the Horns at home.
Yeah, I mean, that title game definitely could still happen. We talked last week about Ohio State having to go to the West Coast, but which is a tough thing to do. But once it's more neutral sites and stuff in the later stages of the playoff, then who knows? And then the last game we had to pick was Memphis is hosting North Texas, and they're a 10-point favorite. We kind of across the board picked them to win and cover, though, watch out for the backdoor cover there. North Texas is not bad.
Yeah, same thought there. I don't have much to add. Memphis at home, pretty good. North Texas has a pretty good offense. It could steal something there.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Throughout the rest of the week, we'll still have some more content on GamecockScoop.com. Got a final preview, got our staff picks and rationale behind some of those. And then we will be there, or Alan will be there. I'll be on my couch on Saturday to bring you live updates. What is Oklahoma Stadium name? Do you know? Pop quiz.
Memorial State. I have it written in the final preview. I don't know, to be honest with you.
Something kind of generic. We don't care about it.
Yeah, the field's named after like Benny Owen, who was like the first great coach there in like 1910. I know that. Gotcha. I don't know what the stadium's called.
Gotcha. First trip out there though, right?
First time ever. Yeah, South Carolina's played Oklahoma in football anywhere.
Well, I meant for you too, right?
Oh, for me, yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So anyway, we'll have some live coverage there, plenty to talk about, and then we'll be back here with the podcast on Sunday to break down what happened. This has been the GamecockScoop.com podcast. We'll